Hello and welcome to Ciphory. In our very first video, I want to gently mess with something that almost everyone is being pushed toward believing. For years, we've heard the same line in different outfits. We live in a simulation. Elon Musk said it. Sci-fi said it. Reddit said it. Podcasts said it. And honestly, it's a pretty convenient idea. Because if this is code, then somewhere there is a coder. If this is a system, then somewhere there is a reason. And if something breaks, maybe there's a reset button. But what if the simulation we're all talking about isn't real at all? Not because we haven't found the code yet, but because there is no code defined. And if that's true, it is not just a fun twist. It changes the mood of everything. Let's talk about why the simulation theory is so addictive. It gives chaos a shape. It makes randomness feel like design. It turns the universe into something like a game engine. Rules, systems, parameters. A universe you could, in theory, run again. It also gives people a secret comfort. Even if the players don't care about us, at least someone is in the room. At least there is an admin panel somewhere. At least reality is a machine. Because machines are understandable. Machines have manuals. Machines have logic. But living inside a manual is not the same as being alive. Now here's where the story takes a turn. In late 2025, researchers connected to the University of British Columbia Okanagan, including physicist Mir Faisal and collaborators, released work arguing something that sounds almost rude. They argue that a fully algorithmic, complete description of reality is impossible. And because any true computer simulation would be algorithmic, they argue that the universe cannot be a simulation in that strong, literal sense. Before we go any further, I need you to hear this clearly. This is not a magic mic drop that ends the debate forever. Science doesn't work like that. But it is a serious argument built from serious limits in logic and computation. And it attacks the simulation idea at its root. Not with vibes, with boundaries. So what are these boundaries? You've probably heard of Gödel's incompleteness theorem. People mention it online like it's a spooky spell. But the core idea is actually simple. If you build a formal system powerful enough to talk about arithmetic, there will be true statements inside that system that cannot be proven using the rules of that system. In other words, a system can contain truths it cannot fully certify from within. That's not a tech problem. That's not, we need better computers. That's a built-in limitation. And Gödel is not alone here. Tarski showed limits about defining truth within a system. Chaitin showed limits tied to information itself, where some truths are essentially uncomputable. The 2025 paper leans on this whole family of results to argue that any theory of everything that is purely algorithmic will hit a wall. Now, let's translate this into normal human language. Imagine you try to write a complete instruction manual for reality. A perfect book that contains every rule, every outcome, every fact. Not a physics textbook. A complete recipe for existence. The claim is that you cannot do it using an algorithm alone. Not because you are stupid, not because your lab budget is low, but because reality includes pieces that do not compress into a finite set of executable steps. There are corners of truth that refuse to become code. That idea has a name in the way people discuss it. Non-algorithmic, meaning not fully capturable by an algorithm. And here's the part that matters for the simulation story. A simulation, by definition, is an algorithm running rules. Even if it's running on a godlike computer, even if it's beyond anything we can imagine, it still needs a procedure. It still needs steps. It still needs do this, then do that. So if the foundation of reality is non-algorithmic, then a perfect simulation is not just difficult, it is impossible in principle. And now we get to the line I want you to remember. A computer can draw a picture of the wind, but it cannot create the wind itself. The chaos inside the wind escapes mathematics. You can model wind, you can approximate it, you can simulate patterns, but the living mess of wind in the real world, interacting with every leaf, every temperature gradient, every tiny turbulence, is not a neat loop of steps. Now take that feeling and scale it up. What if reality itself is like that? Not a clean digital script, not a tidy grid, not a perfect engine. More like weather than code. More like a living storm than a program. At this point, some people say, okay, who cares? If we can simulate things approximately, isn't that enough? Here's why it's not enough. Because the simulation theory people love is not the small version, not the we can model parts of nature version. They love the big version, the version where your reality is rendered, where consciousness is just computation, where the universe is basically software. And the big version carries a hidden promise. If it's software, it can be rerun. If it can be rerun, someone has control. If someone has control, maybe there is a plan. And if there is a plan, then even our suffering sits inside something intentional. That is a psychological safety net. A cold one, but still a net. A non-algorithmic universe cuts that net. Now the horror twist. If reality has no code, then there is no admin panel, no clean blueprint, no guarantee that the deepest layer will ever be fully knowable. You can still do science. The paper even argues that undecidability doesn't kill science. It just limits what computation alone can capture. You can still measure, you can still predict locally, you can still build technology, but you might never get the final source code, because there may be no source code. And that is a different kind of fear. Not we're trapped in a simulation, but there is no frame at all. But I want to be fair. This is where the debate gets spicy. Some critics argue that undecidability does not necessarily kill the simulation hypothesis. They say the conclusion is too strong. They argue that limits on formal systems don't automatically translate into no simulation, or that a simulator could be framed in a way that dodges the paper's assumptions. So if you're waiting for me to say, case closed, simulation fans go home, no. That would be lazy. But here's what doesn't change. Even if the paper is only partially right, it does something powerful. It forces the simulation theory to stop being a comfort trend and start being a serious claim. A claim with constraints. A claim that must confront the limits of computation, not just the coolness of the matrix. And it also reveals something about us. Because once you hear, maybe reality can't be simulated, you start noticing why the simulation idea became so popular. It's a modern creation myth, not in an insulting way, in a very human way. We are pattern hungry. We hate meaningless chaos. We want a reason behind the randomness. We want to believe the universe is a machine because machines feel survivable. But what if the universe isn't a machine? What if it's not running? What if it's just happening? Wildly, indifferently, beautifully, with no guarantee that it owes us answers. Now let's bring this down to earth with a thought experiment. Imagine two worlds. World 1 is code. If you had enough access and enough computing power, you could, in principle, know everything, predict everything, rewind everything, replay everything. World 2 is not code. In World 2, you can learn a lot, but never all of it. There will always be a layer you can't compress into steps, a layer that won't fit into if this, then that. A layer that stays alive, like wind. Which world feels scarier? Be honest. Most people pick World 2, because World 2 removes the fantasy that someone is in control. And when control disappears, responsibility gets louder. No reset, no save file, only consequence. And this is where Ciphory's theme kicks in. I'm not here to sell you comfort. I'm here to tell true stories, strange ideas, and unsettling possibilities in a way that sticks in your brain when you turn the lights off. So here's the question I want you to carry. If reality can't be simulated, then what exactly are we living inside? Not a server, not a program, not a neat equation. Maybe we're living inside something closer to an organism, a storm, a raw existence that can be described, but never fully reduced. Before we end, quick real talk. This channel is a one-person operation. The writing, the research, the editing, the sound, the visuals, all of it. So if this video made you pause and think, support it the simple way. Hit like, subscribe, and if you disagree with me, even better. Drop a comment and make your case. I read them. Final thought. The simulation theory asks, are we living in code? This newer direction asks something darker. What if the universe isn't code at all? What if the deepest layer of reality is non-algorithmic? Not because we're missing a tool, but because no tool can fully capture it. And if that's true, then the scariest part isn't that someone is controlling us. It's that no one is. So I'll leave you with one question, and I want you to answer it in the comments. If reality has no code, what do you think that means for meaning itself? Thanks for staying with Ciphory. See you in the next one.